Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Name One Player podcast. My name is Nicole. I am your host. And before we get into today's episode, I just want to say a huge thank you to every single person who has hit play today. If you like the Name One Player podcast, be sure to follow the show, like the show, rate the show 5 stars, I personally think is best on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. We are also on YouTube, so if you are watching on that, definitely be sure to say hi in the comments. I love hearing from all of you and engaging with you all. And also be sure to follow the Name One Player podcast on whatever social media you're using. We're on it all, and it's the best place to get all the information about the episodes. Today, we have a super fun episode. I am so excited about our guest today, Tayler. And Tayler is the founder and the host of the Hang Time Pod, one of my favorite sports podcasts. Tayler's vision with Hang Time and my vision with Name One Player are very similar. And if you like the Name One Player podcast, I highly recommend that you check out Hang Time if you haven't already. I think you are going to love it. So Tayler's going to get all into what inspired Hang Time, why she decided to create it. Tayler also has years of experience in the sports world, from being a college athlete, playing volleyball at a major college in the United States, to now being a university professor teaching sports management and other courses in sports. So Tayler's going to get all into that, and she even might share some advice for people who might want to go down the road of working in sports. So I'm really excited for this conversation. It is going to be a great one. So I think let's just hop into it, shall we? All right, everyone, without further ado, please welcome Tayler. All right, everybody, we have Tayler here with us. Tayler is the founder and host of Hang Time. Tayler, I'm so excited to have you on. How are you doing today?
I am good. I'm very excited to be here. I mentioned to you I've been following along with Name One Player for a while, so it's fun to be here.
Yeah, and you know what? We'll get all into what Hang Time is, but I feel like our missions are quite similar with the podcast. So I think this is going to be a really fun episode, just talking about how Name One Player and Hang Time really do align. But Tayler, before we get all into that, can you let me and everybody listening know a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. The place I always like to start off is that I'm a farm kid. So I grew up in a small farm town in Illinois, about 500 people. My family does
Wow.
corn and soybeans, and we've got some livestock as well. So some humble beginnings for me. But
Nice.
played volleyball at the University of Illinois and got both my undergrad and my master's degrees there. And that's really where I would say my kind of journey in terms of working in sports started. So as a graduate assistant, I worked in event management for athletics. And then from there, I've kind of just spent the last 12 years in a bunch of different roles in college athletics, from academics and student athlete development to most recently fundraising for major gifts, and then transitioned into a professor role earlier this year. So I'm in my first semester as an assistant teaching professor at the University of Missouri in St. Louis now, and excited to be bringing the last 12 years of experiences into the classroom to help develop the next generation of leaders in sports.
Oh, that is so cool. So first question for you, based off of what you've said, farm girl, humble beginnings. I love that. 500 people in your town. Did you always know that you wanted to go to school and be a student athlete? Did you always know that you wanted to work in sports when you were growing up in your small town? Or did that kind of come to you later on in your college career?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I would say. As a kid, sports were huge for me, and that's probably largely due to the fact that there wasn't a lot else going on where I grew up. And so I grew up playing basketball. I played with the boys in the 4th and 5th grade because we didn't have girls' teams. And then we consolidated or co-opted with another school when I was in 6th grade, and finally got access to basketball, and then that opened up the door for me to also play volleyball, which my school did have. I was obsessed with basketball as a kid. In 5th grade, I remember we had like a choose your career, and the 2 jobs that I wrote down, one was to play in the WNBA and the other was to be a cartoonist. So
Oh,
I don't
cool.
know where that, 2 very separate pathways. But yeah, I feel like sports were always important to me growing up. Basketball, volleyball, played flag football, softball, and then track, basketball, and volleyball is what I focused on in high school. And so having those opportunities from an early age, and I think also growing up at a time when like I would have been 8 or 9 years old, and when the 99ers, Brandy Chastain ripped up off her shirt and slid on her knees, like that was a huge defining moment, I think, for me as a girl who was playing sports. As far as working in sports, I think that's something that came in college, mostly because I got to the second semester of my senior year and I was like, gosh, my playing days are coming to an end. What am I going to do?
Yeah,
And so my bachelor's degree is in advertising. I was really interested in potentially sports marketing
cool.
coming out of undergrad. And so I thought maybe for a pro team, maybe for a college team. And that ultimately is what landed me in that graduate assistantship in event management for athletics at the University of Illinois.
Nice. I loved what you said too, moving into advertising because you're in your senior year and you're like, my days of an athlete are coming to an end, which I did cheerleading my entire life and I was a collegiate cheerleader. And volleyball I feel like is quite similar in the sense of, and actually you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure there is pro leagues, but it's not like the WNBA necessarily. Is that correct?
Yeah, not yet. So the pro opportunities at the time were overseas. So
Okay.
similar in
Yeah.
that there are more opportunities overseas, but now we're seeing this development of, Major League Volleyball with the MLV, the which used to be the Pro Volleyball Federation, and then Love, League One Volleyball. Those both have launched in the last couple of years. And so
Nice.
the opportunities, Athletes Unlimited has a volleyball league as well now, and so the
That's so amazing.
opportunities, yeah, for pro volleyball in the States is growing. It's going
Yeah.
to be interesting to see with these three leagues right now. It's going to be interesting to see kind of how things shake out. But yeah, at the time, and we're talking, 10, 12 years ago, this stuff didn't exist at all. So it's been fun to see the growth, but at the time it was go overseas or you don't play. You move on to
Yeah.
what's next.
Yeah, okay. I didn't realize about those leagues. I'll definitely have to look into those and follow along too, because that does sound exciting, especially when they're kind of in those formative years.
Yeah.
Um, but exactly what you said, you get to this point as a student athlete, and it's kind of your identity for many years of your life, and then it just hits you, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to be a volleyball player in your case. I'm not going to be a cheerleader and all the other athletes who are kind of going through that. So that is really cool that you were still able to tie in your love of sports with your professional career as you did graduate. And you mentioned now you are a professor, which is so cool. And I feel like when I think of careers in sports, it's been amazing learning just about how many options and avenues there are. There's honestly endless. But academia was something that I really haven't it hasn't been on my mind, and it's quite funny because one of my favorite courses in university, I studied psychology, and I took a sports psychology class, and it was my favorite class. But even then, it didn't really clock it to me that like that's a whole career that you can have. So can you tell me a little bit more about you being a professor in sports?
Yeah, this is so this Friday is going to be the official end of the fall semester. So this is my
Okay.
first semester as a professor. My mom actually was a professor in the College of Business and Technology at Western
That's
Illinois University for
cool.
years. And so she might tell you that of course she could see this for me always, but this was never, as they say, not on the bingo card. It wasn't on my radar at all
Yeah.
to move into this space. But I think it's kind of a marriage of all the things that I love about sports, right? Having had the opportunity to work in event management for years and student athlete development, there's a lot of similarities, I would say, in academic advising for athletes, student athlete development, and building programs and curriculum and teaching and all of those kinds of things. And so I think there's a natural kind of crossover. I'm not in sports like in the way that I was working in college athletics, but having the knowledge and the experience again of the last 12 years like working in industry, and then now being able to translate that to the classroom and again to help students who are specifically interested in working in sports, working with student athletes. They obviously know sports, but they
Yeah.
don't necessarily always want to work in that space. And so it's been interesting to kind of put on again this curriculum hat and think about, okay, what are the things that I wish I knew going into work in sports, and how do we help kind of fast track that for this next generation of students and leaders and sport managers.
That's amazing. This is, again, to a totally random question. I'm thinking about, because I have friends who are teachers in public schools, like elementary, middle, high school, and the curriculum is written by the government. But as a university professor, do you write your own curriculum?
Yeah, so the program at the University of Missouri in St. Louis, where I am, has only existed for the last 5 years. So it started in COVID. I'm only the second faculty member to join.
Wow.
And so this fall, I've got two sections of an intro to sport management class, which is just kind of covering the basics. That course, for the most part, was already created, and of course I've kind of taken it and added things, subtracted things, to make it make sense for me. But I'm also teaching a sports media and technology class this fall, and that one has been developed from scratch. So I'll bring the intro to sport management with me in the spring and teach another section of that, and then I'll have ethics in sports and leadership in sports, both of which I will build the curriculum for there as well.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Like, just being
Yeah,
so hands-on, and the fact that it is a newer program. And you said you were the second faculty member?
I am.
Wow.
Yep.
That is so cool. And just being able to grow it and develop it in the way that you want, but then also, kind of have that process of ironing out the kinks and realizing maybe what isn't working as well, because it is going to be a learning experience, a bit of a learning curve with it being so brand new, but that is so cool. I love that. I was also thinking too, in the sports program that was offered at my university, and it was a smaller university. I live in Canada, by the way, and it was a smaller program, but the entire faculty were men. And at that time, this was also too 10 or so years ago, it wasn't necessarily on my mind. Like, I didn't realize that I wasn't seeing women in those roles, because to me, men were in those roles. Like, women weren't teaching about sports management at that time, or it wasn't nearly as visible. So I can imagine, myself being in college and walking into my course and seeing a woman teaching the program. That would be so amazing. Being a woman in this field that definitely is still more male dominated. How has that experience been for you?
Yeah, representation is everything in sports, and especially I think when it comes to women in sports, being able to see people who look like you and who, have paved the way. I think in the exact same way in playing sports, right? I mentioned seeing Brandy Chastain and what a moment that was for me. The same thing for watching, Lisa Leslie as a kid, and eventually Diana Taurasi and Sue Bird and all the greats in basketball. I think it's the exact same thing from a work standpoint.
Yeah.
I can remember having a conversation with a colleague. This has been a while ago, but she was like, it didn't even, just as you were saying, like, it didn't even occur to me that this could be a job until I
Yeah.
saw a woman who was in this job. And then I thought, oh, I can go and work in this space too. And so I think if I think back about my own undergrad and grad careers, most of my professors, and again, from advertising as a bachelor's degree into recreation, sport, and tourism as my master's degree, most of my professors were men. I can probably count on one hand the amount of women who I had as professors. So I think it's important to be in the space, and not only as a woman who is teaching, but also as a woman, again, who spent 12 years in industry and has the experience of also working in sports that can kind of directly translate to the students. So I know a lot of times in undergrad or at university, you have professors who are telling, this is the academic way and this is what we know and believe. And yes, there are aspects of that I know and believe, but I also can lean on the experiences that I've had out there in the quote unquote real world in sports
Yeah.
to again tell students, hey, this is what you can expect, and this is how it's going to be, and here's how we're preparing you for those things and why we prepare you in the way that we do.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I love that. And I really love what you said too, just about representation. And I think that is such an amazing point and such a great segue, really, into talking about Hang Time and the Hang Time podcast. And I love the slogan that I see on your Instagram, your TikTok. You mention it at the beginning of your episodes, how Hang Time is meant to amplify the stories of women in sports. And I think that just ties in so well with representation. It's one thing to see these people, but then also to be listening to the stories of women in sports and giving women this platform to talk about their stories, their lives, their experiences being women in sports, but then also to amplify it, exactly what you're doing, and getting their stories out there for more people to listen to and hear and be inspired by, really. So I'd love to get more into Hang Time. Where did the idea come from? What inspired this? How did the Hang Time pod come to be?
Yeah, kind of again, I talked about some of the marriage of the experiences that I've had up to date. The Hang Time is no exception to that. So I actually started originally launched it as the Bloom Pod back
Yes.
back in 2020, which was the result. I had won a contest to be the Bloom and Onion mascot at the 2019 Outback Bowl, and so this idea of kind of blooming and forming into, what are the experiences that help you bloom into the person that you are today was kind of the gist behind it. And so had launched that, I think it was April of 2020, and spent time talking to folks who were entrepreneurs, folks in higher education and in sports, and just talking to them about kind of some of the big quote unquote dreams that they were chasing, in the world. And I launched that for a couple reasons. One, because I wanted to launch a podcast, but also it was a great way, obviously, during the beginnings of COVID and quarantine to kind of help stay connected to people. And then I was also gearing up at that time for my dissertation research. And so it was helping me to practice interviewing people and having conversations, both with folks that I knew already, but also with folks who I'd wanted to connect with and didn't necessarily know. And so, yeah, it was a kind of a twofold there to be able to help me with both of those things. But I had taken a little bit of a hiatus when I took my most previous role working in fundraising, put the podcast on the back burner. And then around this time last year, I had a friend who was I'll say politely pushy in that she was like, what are we doing? We got to get back to podcasting, kind of the world is waiting. And so we had talked, would we do a series on talking about women in sports? And she kind of works in the same space. And so, hey, what if we did something together? We're kind of brainstorming. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, if I do a series on women in sports for the Bloom Pod, I don't know that I'm going to want to go back to not talking about women in sports once that series ends. And so that's kind of what the idea was born out of. I wish I had a better story as far as the name and the branding, other than it just hit me one day. I mentioned I played volleyball at the University of Illinois. I was one of the shortest outsides on our team. It's behind a couple of baller All-American outside hitters, but I used to be able to jump. And so whenever people are like, oh, you played with those people, or oh, you did that, whatever, I'm like, I used to be able to get a little bit of hang time. Like I could jump back in the day. Not so much anymore, but it just hit me. That was kind of it's a sports phrase. If you're familiar, when people are jumping, they hang in the air for a little bit, and then just this concept of kind of carrying on from the Bloom Pod, being able to hang out with people and talk to them. I think some of the most pivotal things that I've learned over the course of my life have been just in conversation like this, where you're talking to somebody, you're hearing about their career path, and then again, back to representation, you're kind of able to see, oh, maybe that's a path I would be interested in, or maybe there's something in that path that could help me get to what I want to do for a career. So yeah, just a lot of different things that kind of led to the relaunch earlier this year, but it's been so much fun to get back to it and to be talking to women in sports and folks who are supporting women's sports. So it's been awesome.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. We gotta always give it up to those politely pushy friends. I like the way
100%.
that you worded that. Because it's so
100%.
true. It's like, imagine too, it's like if your friend wasn't politely pushy, it's like, where could you be now? Maybe hang time wouldn't even exist.
Yeah, it for sure would not if she hadn't been like, "Ma'am, what are we doing? Like, let's get to it." Yeah, it for
Yeah.
sure would not be a thing.
And I really liked what you said too about was it called the Bloom podcast?
It was, yeah, the Bloom
Yes.
Pod. Yep.
So yeah, when I was just doing a little bit of research on hang time and everything, and then I scrolled back to the beginning episodes, and yeah, I saw that it was the Bloom Pod, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And I listened to a few, and I noticed that it wasn't a focus in sports, and so I was really curious how it shifted from, talking to really kind of everybody. And I
Mhm.
just love that idea. That is a really creative name. So is hang time, but just Bloom and your last name being Onion and the
Yep.
whole Bloom and Onion, that contest, that's amazing. But just having conversations with people about how they bloomed into the people that they are today. But the slogan of wanting to amplify the stories of women in sports, what does that mean to you? Why is it important to you?
Yeah, I mean, women in sports and women's sports are criminally underrepresented when it comes to media in general, but particularly in sports media. I think we're seeing a ton of shift there right now. One of the most recent episodes I did, we were talking with the director of research and insights at Parity about some of the data that we now have to lean on, right? Like these conversations over the course of years and this idea of nobody watches women's sports. Like we now have the data to say what we knew all along, which is that everyone is watching women's sports, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing attendance records broken repeatedly. We're seeing viewership grow repeatedly. I think there can never be enough voices talking about women's sports and talking about women in sports. And again, for me, some of the most kind of impactful things that I have learned or heard or kind of been around when I think about professional development opportunities that I've had over the course of my career, it's almost always learning something about someone's story and learning something about why they got into the role that they're in or why they were interested in pursuing that type of work to begin with. And so I think that's where, for me, it's just the conversation and being able to chop it up a little bit and learn about what inspires people to get into the fields that they're in and why are they interested in women's sports, what's kind of the origin story for their entree into women's sports. And so again, it's been so much fun, but I think there's been a gap. Representation is down in that space, and so it's good to be able to kind of contribute to the growth of people talking about women's sports right now.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree. And I wrote this down and I circled it. How you said there's never enough voices of women talking about their experiences. And it is so true. And I completely agree. Listening to that last episode that you did and hearing about the different data, and actually, I mean, I didn't see the data, but like having it in front of you and picturing it and having this tangible thing that you can see that there's differences, but at the same time it's not, I mean, I sound negative here saying this, like it's not enough, and it can never be enough because there's always room for more. There's always room for growth in these spaces. I think sports, if you think about men's sports in particular, like there's so many podcasts and nobody's really looking at that and being like, okay, stop, we're hearing too much.
Right.
Like we don't want any more. And there certainly has been an increase in podcasts and the representation in media of women being there, and unfortunately there are some groups of people who are like, okay, we've seen enough now, like we do have that one token woman on the screen, and we've had enough. We do have that one professional women's league, we don't need any more. But no, like we want more. We want it all. And it is so cool to see the growth. But I think that you nailed it with how you said it. There's never enough voices, there's never enough stories to listen to, and it's just amazing that you have made this platform that amplifies these stories and just continues to create spaces for these stories to be told. But what is the plan for Hang Time? Are you just here to continue having these stories being told?
Yes, first and foremost, yes.
Great.
It's absolutely to continue amplifying the voices and stories of women in sports. But I'm starting to explore what might that look like even outside of the podcast. So again, I talked about some professional development stuff that I've been involved with. We do have an exciting I'll say event coming up here in a couple of weeks that is not quite public yet, so I won't share
Nice.
many
Ooh,
details.
okay.
But I'm hoping to be able to replicate that and into the future. And so looking to create more opportunities for connection, create more opportunities for education for women in sports. And again, for those who are supporting women's sports, I think we definitely, there's not enough media coverage. There's not enough attention on even jobs and networking. And for women who are interested in working in sports, how do we help connect point A to point B? I mentioned from a media attention standpoint, very underrepresented. The same is also true of women in leadership in sports. And we see in the States, because of Title IX legislation, we've seen participation for girls in sports skyrocket, right? Over the last however many years, 53 years now, I think it's been. But we've seen almost the exact opposite happen for women in leadership roles in sports. And so, what are the ways that we can reduce barriers? What are the ways that we can reduce obstacles and help kind of build up that network of women who are interested in working in sports and make it easier for them to not only get those positions of leadership in sports, but to be able to stay at those tables and continue advancing. So anything that supports that mission is exactly what I'm trying to do with Hang Time.
Nice. Well, I'm super excited to see how Hang Time grows. You mentioned that you didn't really have this like really grand story of the name and the branding, but I love the name and the branding. Like even how it just came to you quickly. I think it is so great. I love how your episodes start with let's have some hang time because I think it's exactly what you said. It is this blend of yes, it is a sports term. It is a play on the words, not even really a play on the words, it's the words. But it is just a place for connection and listening to the episodes, hearing the connection that is had each episode and the conversations and just how insightful they are and how encouraging they are for women who maybe want to work in sports or even who don't. Like, it's just fun to listen to women who are successful and love what they're doing. That's what I think with Hang Time and then also Name One Player and speaking to you too. I love having these conversations because the genuine passion that everybody that I interview, everybody that you interview, the passion that they have and the love that they have for the roles that they're in just shines through, and the conversations really are just so amazing. But I just really loved what you said about professional development, and when you said that something that you learned just organically, nobody necessarily told you this, but you learned so much just by having these conversations with people and building these connections. So, if anybody's listening today who might be thinking about working in sports media, starting a podcast, working in these leadership roles that, again, like you mentioned, there's really not nearly as much female representation in these roles, is there anything that you wish you maybe were told back when you were at the beginning of your career that you would love to pass on to anybody listening today?
Yeah, gosh, so many things come to mind right away. I think the first thing that came to mind is this idea of self-advocacy, right? And I think about this a lot from my student athlete days. When you're an athlete, I'm sure you know this too, you are told like where to be, when to be, how to be for such a long time. And I think especially in youth sports and in high school sports, there are a lot of people, teachers, coaches, mentors, parents even, who are advocating for you, and they're saying, ooh, you should try this, you would be good at this. And you need people to do that in those kind of formative years. But that kind of completely falls off in college, and you're now in a space where you're a young adult and managing on your own, and you don't have as many people saying, hey, you should try this, hey, you would be good at this. They're not politely pushing in the same way, right? Unless you build those relationships. And so I think if I look back on my own student athlete experience, and one of the main things that when I worked in student athlete development, we tried to focus on with our freshman and sophomore student athletes is this idea of self-advocacy, right? Like, you know yourself and your interests better than anybody else, and you have to voice them. Like, if you're
Yeah.
interested in a career in sports, a teacher, a coach, a mentor is not going to be able to help you if they don't know that. And so I think the same goes for women in sports and for folks who are interested in working in women's sports. Like you have to start speaking to the things that you want, like manifest audibly all the time. Like, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. And you never know, even if the person you're talking to doesn't have a direct kind of road into whatever it is, they might know somebody who knows somebody who can help you get into that space. And so I think the biggest thing I could offer is just speaking up for yourself unapologetically, right? Like constantly advocating for yourself and sharing your dreams and hopes and all the things is probably the best thing that you can do in terms of going to work in sports or just supporting women's sports.
I love that. That is such great advice. So thank you for sharing that. Just as you were saying, that in sports, it really is helpful to speak about your dreams, to just be open about it, to manifest, to dream big. And again, this isn't really something that I ever really realized until having this conversation. So perfect to your point that you made previously. But I think sports is one of those areas where it is acceptable to dream big. Of course, you are gonna have those people being like, "Oh no, 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 you're never gonna make it pro. You're never gonna do that." But like sports, as a little kid, you wrote down that you wanted to be a WNBA player. Like that is just what sports is. It's seeing this like highest level that you kind of know is sometimes unattainable, or when you just look at population sizes, like not every single person who dreams about working in sports is going to get there. But sports, you're allowed to dream big. You have to dream big really if you want to be successful in sports. And I don't know that there's a lot of other, careers or avenues that it is as acceptable to dream big, but also as necessary to dream big. So that is such a great point. But I think also too, tying in women in sports and that self-advocacy piece and just getting really clear on what you want and then speaking up for it. I think that's so cool that you're ingraining that into your courses now and having these young students and women in particular learning just how important and necessary it is to have a career in sports. I love that. But I think that ties in really well to my last question for you, actually, Tayler. And that is the name one player question that I ask of every guest who comes on. Obviously, the name of the show called Name One Player Podcast. And that came to be because of, I used to talk about sports on Twitter quite often, football in particular, the Minnesota Vikings. I used to get asked to name one player all the time. I used to get questioned about my level of fandom all the time and just my knowledge. And it just felt like there was such a different air of me needing to prove myself strictly because they would see my profile picture. That I looked feminine and they would see my name, Nicole, typically a woman's name, and I just would get met with completely different attitudes than the men in my life who talked about sports. So my question for you, and you have so much experience working in sports and being a woman in sports in this male-dominated field, do you have any experiences of that sort of name one player vibe, just being treated differently because you are a woman working in this male-dominated field?
Yeah, I think the whole concept is like being underrated, right? Like whether it's men assuming that you don't know anything about sports because you're a woman, just this feeling of like being made to feel less than. When I think about just my time in sports and whatever, I mentioned that I played flag football growing up, and I was always picked last because I was the only girl who was playing with the boys. I mentioned that I played basketball with the boys' teams. I can remember, we would show up to another team's gym and they're like, "Oh, you guys have a girl on your team."
Oh
And
God.
then, like, this is a humble brag, but like, I was one of the best players on both of those teams, like on the
Nice.
flag football teams, on the basketball teams. And I just always felt underestimated. And so I
Yeah.
think that fueled just the rest of my athletic career. I can remember having conversations even when I was in high school and I had kind of started to, speaking of self-advocacy, starting to talk about I want to play volleyball at the University of Illinois. And I can remember people being like, "You can't, they're 6'4", like you're only 5'10", you're never going to be able to play there." And I think that kind of chip on my shoulder is what has not only fueled me through my athletic career, but has continued to fuel me even throughout my career as a woman working in sports as well. I can not count on two hands even the amount of times that I've been called sweetheart or kiddo, working in sports. And so I think this idea of kind of being underrated. I think back about my student athlete experience. We were my junior year number one in the country for 4 straight weeks, and we were good. Like, we were really good. I won't be humble
Nice.
about that. But
Nice.
every time we would go to an airport or we're traveling as a team or whatever, people would be like, "Oh, what do you girls play?" And we would tell, we play volleyball and whatever. And then they would ask, "Oh, are you any good?" And our favorite thing to do was to be like, "Yeah, we do okay." And then, you always hope that they go and look it up after the fact and see like, "Oh, they're the number one team in the country right now."
I love that.
And so I think this idea of being underrated again has just fueled. I'm sure it's not just me. Like, I'm sure there's so many other women who feel that way. Again, I think that's kind of the basis of your podcast and this concept of name one player. That kind of feeling of being underrated, I think, has probably done more to add fuel to the fire of women's sports and kind of this attention that's on them right now and this rapid growth that we're seeing. I think it is because we've all felt like there's been a chip on our shoulder for such a long time. And so, again, it's so fun to see the growth of the game right now and the growth of sports media and other women's voices in this space. And I'm just so grateful that you're doing this and shedding light on this concept of name one player. It's great.
Well, I mean, and I'm grateful for you too. Like the Hang Time Pod, it really, like I mentioned at the beginning, I think the missions really are so similar. And even just with me asking each guest to tell me their name one player stories. And that to me also kind of came from, yes, that chip on the shoulder, but also kind of knowing that unfortunately it's one day I would love for it to go away. Like, we're talking about dreaming big. Oh, if I could dream big, there'd be no differences at all, but then I might not have a podcast, you might not have a podcast if it was totally equal. But dreaming big, I would just love to not have to have those stories or have it not be a story to tell because it's just not something that's happening that's being treated differently. But I loved what you said too, just about the chip on your shoulder. Having the chip on your shoulder, yes, but also to turn it into a positive thing because I think it is so easy to let it get you down. And I'm thinking about as a little girl, like getting picked last. I think for myself, like when I was little, if that happened to me, I don't know that I would have had this chip on my shoulder and let it fueled me. Like, I think there's a very real possibility that I would have been like, okay, women can't play sports. I'm never going to be respected. And I think part of that does go down to personality, but I just love that you use that as a positive. And that's also what I think Hang Time is doing and Name One Player is doing is turning these unfortunately negative experiences into positives and finding the fuel in that and finding the motivation in that because who wants to live in the negativity of it all? Not me. But I just think that's so amazing that you use that chip on your shoulder, which I think often it can be coined as a negative term, having that chip on your shoulder, but just knowing that it pushed you to drive change and to prove people wrong. So I love what you're doing with Hang Time and teaching the what do they call kids, students? They're the future of tomorrow or whatever.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing there and, just inspiring not only women, but just showing them that there's these careers available to them. And then also having incredible guests on your podcast. Actually, this is another thing too, out of left field. Speaking of manifesting, do you have a dream guest? Dream as big as you can possibly get for the Hang Time Pod.
I mean, I feel inclined to say Billie Jean King.
Okay.
Because of all the great things that she has done for women's sports. I think
Yeah.
without her and the fight that she's had for, closing the pay gap and all of these things. Like she would be fantastic. But also 9-year-old Taylor 100% wants Brandy Chastain and Lisa Leslie. This version of me would love to connect with Asia Wilson and Dawn Staley. And if there's a world where we can cross the divide and or time travel, then Pat Summitt is for sure on that list as well. I think there's so many
Yeah.
kind of big guests that would be so amazing to have. It's hard to limit that to just one.
Well, you know what? That was the perfect answer. We'll keep the five-ish names that you gave,
Yeah.
and we just know that the list is really endless because there really are so many incredible women in sports, and I'm so excited to keep following along with Hang Time and to see all the other incredible guests that you have on, and I will be manifesting all of those wonderful athletes to come on. Maybe I clip this and then tag them all.
Amazing. I love it. I love it.
Well, Taylor, thank you so much for coming on. Where can everybody listen to Hang Time and follow you guys on social media?
Yeah, we are just anywhere that you get your podcast. So if you want to follow us on social media, it's at HangTimeP0D. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on X sometimes, not always.
I know it's hard to stay on top of that one. I don't know
It
why.
is. It's changed, I feel like, in the last few years. But yeah, so we're in all those spaces. Again, we're wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever. And then as of earlier this year, we're also on YouTube. So you can follow us there and watch now. We've added video in, and so yeah, all the places.
Amazing. Well, yeah, everybody listening, if you like the Name One Player podcast, you will definitely like the Hang Time pod. It is so many similarities and just a really fun listen. Taylor, you're an incredible interviewer. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. All right, Taylor, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. Thank you so much to Taylor for that amazing conversation. I love talking to podcast hosts. I think it's just so much fun. Anybody who's come on the Name One Player podcast, and maybe anybody who hasn't, a little behind the scenes. Before we hit record, I do a little preamble, just talking about what to expect, ask if they have any questions, just some kind of housekeeping things. And we were laughing because she's like, oh, this is literally everything that I say. So really fun talking to other hosts of podcasts. It was so much fun to pick Taylor's brain and hear all about what inspired the Hang Time pod. Again, if you like the Name One Player podcast, I highly recommend that you go check out Hang Time Pod and listen to the episodes that Taylor has put out there. They're really amazing, and I highly recommend them. Again, thank you so much, Taylor, for coming on and chatting all about your experience working in sports, from being an athlete to where you are now, the host and the founder of Hang Time, while also being a university professor teaching sports management. And thank you for those amazing pieces of advice. I loved what Taylor said about that self-advocacy piece. I feel like that's so important for anybody in sports, but especially women in sports. You gotta dream big and you gotta fight for yourself. You gotta know what you want and you gotta advocate. So important. So thank you so much to Taylor for sharing that piece of wisdom. All right, that is all for me for today. Before I go, I will say thank you one more time to every single person for listening today. It means so much to me. I am so grateful for every single one of you. If you like today's episode, be sure to let me and Taylor know. On YouTube and on Spotify, you can comment on the episodes. Definitely be sure to go follow Taylor and Hang Time so that you can follow along with everything that they are putting out there as well. All right, that is all for me. I think I'm gonna get out of here. You know what? I will say, this is totally going against everything that I've just done. What I was going to say is, you know what? I've really improved, I think, on making my conclusions short and sweet and to the point. If you are a longtime listener of the Name One Player podcast and you listen to the OG episodes, my conclusions would honestly be like 12 minutes long and I would not know how to say goodbye. And I feel like I'm going against my whole point of what I'm saying, is that I have improved and I've gotten a lot better. And I now am able to say goodbye to all of you, even though it is hard. I never want to say goodbye, but I'm better at it. But then now I just kind of went against that point and just added this whole thing in that has nothing to do with anything, but I am actually going to go now. All right, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day and a lovely rest of your week. Take care, everyone. Bye.